A monumental development for the WNBA. For the first time in the league's 27-year history, every team will have charter flights for all road games this season. In the previous 26 years, all teams were forced to travel on commercial flights. WNBA Commissioner Kathy Engelbert said the use of private jets will help address concerns of travel fatigue for players and safety concerns when players had to walk through airports. The WNBA's 12 teams will play 40 regular season games, 20 on the road. The NBA will announce its Most Valuable Player Award today. The winner will be revealed on TNT's Inside the NBA pregame show. The three finalists are Luka Doncic of Dallas, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander of Oklahoma City, and Denver center Nikola Jokic. Clippers guard Russell Westbrook is a finalist for the NBA's Social Justice Champion Award. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580 is the fastest growing talk radio station in Southern California, home to 50,000 watts and an audience reach of 12 million listeners. KBLA Talk 1580 is a pioneer for black audio content, including our groundbreaking $2 million climate justice campaign and the most loyal, influential audience. According to an independent research study by the polling firm Rhetoric, for the second consecutive year, KBLA Talk 1580 is the most trustworthy, reliable, and credible news source for black audiences and beyond your advertising dollars. Our omni-channel custom marketing solutions are specifically tailored to connect with your ideal target audience. We leverage audio, podcasts, streaming, digital, social media, and local activations to get your message out to the black community. Get in touch with our advertising team today at advertising@KBLA1580.com. That's advertising at KBLA1580.com. KBLA 1580. We've got you black.
Child grows up to be somebody that just loves to learn. And another child grows up to be somebody you just love to burn. Mom loves the both of them. You see it's in the blood.
I'm Tavis, Smiley, and I'm glad to have you with us today. A pretty amazing first hour. And we will commence our second hour here in just a moment. In our third hour today, don't forget two conversations. Derek Black was raised to take over the white nationalist movement in the U.S. His father was a former Grand Wizard in the KKK. David Duke was a family friend, and we'll talk to Derek. I'm looking forward to this conversation about renouncing a community of hate and becoming an anti-racist. His book is called A Klansman's Son, My Journey from White Nationalism to Anti-Racism. Look forward to that dialogue with Derek Black on the top of our third and final hour. And then on the back side of hour three, a tribute to my father, Emory G. Smiley Sr., my hero, who passed away the other day. We'll do a tribute to Dad on the back side of this hour. You don't really know me unless you know my father. And so I'll share that with you on the back side of our third and final hour. In this hour, though, as promised, please be joined by history professor Touré Reed, who is back today with a deep dive into the current campus protest through the lens of the black protest tradition. And he has a lot of other stuff going on we'll talk about in this hour, including a new monograph project called Menace to Equality, how the entertainment industry sold Reaganism to African Americans. We're going to get deep in this hour. We always do when Touré Reed shows up. Touré, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, brother. Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you on the program. Thank you for your time. Glad you have an hour because there's a lot to unpack in this hour. Let me start. let me start with this. These campus protests are interesting for a lot of reasons. That is, not the least of which is I have been expressing my own concern about the pushback that we are seeing at all levels in this country against protest. If you break windows and you break laws, then you have to suffer the consequences. Dr. King did that, went to jail proudly, unapologetically. I understand that part. But I'm getting really, really troubled by the rhetoric, and indeed, when President Biden did his best the other day before leaving the White House for a trip to talk about these protests, the language just really started to bother me because protest does have its place. And by definition, protest is a disruption. It's supposed to cause disruption. That's why you do it in the first place. And so I'm just getting really, really concerned about the language about protest. And I'm concerned in part because we, the black community, taught the nation how to protest. We did this first, and we kicked down the door, and everybody else sort of followed us through. So in many ways, and although I'm chagrined by this from time to time, we are the litmus test when it comes to protest in this country. Black folk are the litmus test when it comes to protest. I want to spend some time talking about these current campus protests through the lens of the black protest tradition. With that, I pass the mic to the professor from Illinois State, Touré Reed.
Well, thank you. I share a lot of your concerns, Tavis, and I think you're right that on the whole, contemporary protest politics is modeled, or at least inspired by the civil rights movement, right? I mean, I think when most of us think of nonviolent protest, the go-to is the civil rights movement. Now, I would add that in many instances, what we reflexively think of as a civil rights movement is very far removed from the civil rights context, the political context, the legal context, but also the training that civil rights activists had in a bygone era, right? Because the civil rights movement of yesteryear was very disciplined and framed its demands within the context of the Second World War, the Cold War, and even if you want, I mean, some of us historians might trace the civil rights movement, at least in the North, origins to the New Deal. Obviously, those protest campaigns during the Cold War were both informed by and constrained by the era's politics, right? Mm-hmm. The civil rights activists of yesteryear in the 50s had shied away from the class politics that informed civil rights activism during the 30s and 40s, informed by McCarthyism. But at the same time, those civil rights activists looked to the Cold War context, in particular decolonization taking place in Africa and the so-called Third World more broadly, populated by obviously people of African descent if you're in Africa, but also people of African descent throughout the Western Hemisphere and, of course, Asia as well, right? Not people of African descent, but colonized people in South Asian, Southeast Asian, et cetera. And so that broader political context both narrowed and fueled the scope of civil rights activism. And I think we see that happening now. I haven't given this a lot of thought, but and it's the last thing I'll say on this matter. But I can't help but think that the protest campaigns of the last few or several years have been indispensable to informing the recent campus uprisings in support of the humanity of Palestinians. And that was an unexpected development, I think, for a lot of people.
Let me jump in right there. Nobody on this program thus far has made that point and made that connection. You hear Professor Touré Reed make the point that he believes that the protests of the last few years, I assume he means namely protests oftentimes led and spearheaded by Black Lives Matter, cannot be disconnected from the protests that we are seeing now. So that those protests on the watch of BLM have been indispensable to the protest that we see now. Let's probe that when we come forward. Also, this notion he raises a moment ago that the civil rights movement protests were much more disciplined. I'm noodling on that. I may push back on that. I may argue with him a bit on that, but I take his point. I think he's right, broadly speaking. But it raises questions about whether or not, how we would respond, let me put it that way, how we would respond to people who criticize these current protests and say, unlike the civil rights movement, these protests just aren't disciplined enough. We'll talk about that and a great deal more. We're joined by history professor Touré Reed right now on Tavis Smiley.
Interrogating and unpacking. That's what we do around here. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
Hey, y'all. Mona Swain here from Target's new YouTube series, My Cart is Full, where we feature Black founders and creators highlighting their connection to our community. As an actor and content creator, I love using my voice to inspire young Black women who look like me. When it comes to feeding my shine, seeing myself reflected in Black-owned and founded products at Target brings me joy. Together, we are Black Beyond Measure. Learn more at target.com/blackbeyondmeasure.
Cookie wants to be a professional wrestler.
I'm Cookie Serratos, and I'm 11 years old.
She also wants to win all the medals. That's why Cookie and her family make every day count, squeezing out her best with Go-Go Squeeze.
Okay, Cookie, let's break for a Go-Go Squeeze.
Go-Go Squeeze fruit-on-the-go pouches are a nutritious snack made from 100% fruit with no sugar added.
Go, Cookie!
Because when you nurture your kids, you squeeze out the best in them. Squeeze out the best with Go-Go Squeeze. Not a low-calorie food. Products range from 11 to 13 grams of sugar and fat.
I have asthma. I'm at risk, too.
If you're 19 or older with chronic conditions like asthma, diabetes, COPD, or heart disease, or are 65 or older, you are at increased risk for pneumococcal pneumonia. Ask your doctor or pharmacist about Prevnar 20, pneumococcal 20-valent conjugate vaccine, a Pfizer vaccine that can help protect you against pneumococcal pneumonia in just one dose. Even if you've already been vaccinated with other pneumonia vaccines, Prevnar 20 may help provide added protection. Prevnar 20 is approved for adults to help prevent infections from 20 strains of the bacteria that cause pneumococcal pneumonia. Continued approval may depend on a supportive study. Don't get Prevnar 20 if you've had a severe allergic reaction to the vaccine or its ingredients. Adults with weakened immune systems may have a lower response to the vaccine. Side effects include pain and swelling at the injection site, fatigue, headache, muscle, and joint pain. For full prescribing information, please call 1-855-213-2138 or visit Prevnar20.com.
Hi, I'm Henry Winkler. My eyes are very important to me. My eyes connect me with everything I love. I loved my late father-in-law dearly. He always lit up a room, but his vision dimmed with age. He had age-related macular degeneration, or AMD. And since partnering with Apellis, I've learned there's an advanced form of dry AMD called geographic atrophy, or GA. His struggle with vision loss made me want to help others know about GA's warning signs. For some, colors appear dull or washed out. For others, hazy or blurred vision make it hard to see details, like fine print on price tags. Many have trouble seeing in the dark, making driving at night difficult. GA gets worse over time and cannot be reversed. If you think you have GA, don't wait. Treatments are available. Ask a retina specialist about FDA-approved treatments for GA and go to GAWon'tWait.com.
More honesty than you can handle. More empowerment than you can imagine. You're tuned in to Tavis Smiley.
Tavis Smiley, a noted history professor at Touré Reed, as we discuss a number of things in this hour, namely, at least at the outset here, how we can view these current campus protests through the lens of the black protest tradition in this country. It is the case, as far as I'm concerned, that every protest in this country takes its learnings from the civil rights movement. We taught this nation how to protest, and others have followed in our stead, or in that regard. I am troubled, as I said a moment ago, by the pushback that we are getting from the White House on down about protest in this country. Everybody doesn't. It seems these days nobody wants to be made uncomfortable by these protests. Well, that's the point of a protest, and you can't laud Dr. King, at least in January around his birthday, around his holiday. You can't laud him and not understand what he did and what he stood for. King was all about protest. I get troubled by the way we again have this conversation. I am troubled by the way we're having this conversation about protest, as if that wasn't at the epicenter of what King did. I mean, think about Mandela. Think about Gandhi. I mean, think about there are so many figures in history we could talk about that we celebrate at the appropriate time. But now, in this particular moment, everybody wants to, not everybody, but too many people want to push back against these protests. And again, it's one thing to push back against certain knuckleheads. And I said before, there are knuckleheads on either side, on both sides of these protests, no question about it. And I'm talking specifically now about Israel and Palestine and these protests on college campuses and beyond. So there are always knuckleheads, always somebody on either side who will say or do something crazy. But I'm seeing us paint with this broad brush and push back against the notion of protest in this country. As I said the other day, somewhere I read about the Boston Tea Party. And we are taught all the time that was a great moment in America's history, a great moment, the Boston Tea Party. So it seems to me, Touré Reed, that we like the protest and we like the protestors that we like, and we don't like the protest and the protestors that we don't like. I'll put a pin in that for now, but you said two things already that I want to spend some time unpacking or give you a chance to unpack, as it were. And the first is this notion that there is an indispensable link, that was your word, between the protests we are seeing now and the protests we've seen of the last few years. I hope I didn't put words in your mouth. That's why you're here. So explain what you meant by the use of that word, indispensable, connecting those protests with these protests.
Yeah. So one thing that you said I want to play with for a hot second before I respond directly to that is I think that you're right that there are protests we like, but oftentimes the protests we like are in the rearview mirror, right? I mean, everyone likes to be on the right side of history, so I've long been struck by the fact that conservatives who are anti-statist, anti-working people, who have likewise been connected to policies that have had a disproportionately negative impact on Black Americans since the 80s, have subsequently, after King's death, embraced Martin Luther King as a national treasure, right? And you have only to think of the fact that it's Ronald Reagan who signed King Day into law. That's right. And you go back about 10 or 12 years, Glenn Beck had wrapped himself in the legacy of King in his 9/12 March, I believe is what it was called, which was a pro-small government project that was the antithesis of what the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom was about. So I think part of what's going on is that the protests we like only in the rearview mirror because everyone likes to be on the right side of history. With regard to the particular question, the relationship between the protests engendered by in response to police violence and the like, and their relationship to where we are today, I think that BLM and related efforts have really primed the pump to get many Americans across racial lines, but certainly Black Americans, to understand the value of grassroots politics in a way that those of us who were, interestingly enough, the children of people who were involved in the civil rights movement as Gen Xers, really didn't embrace to quite the same extent, right? So I think there's a cultural shift in how we understand protest politics, its place in American democracy that's taken place over the last several years. And that cultural shift, I think, is owed in some large part to BLM, but also a great deal of disillusionment about the two-party system. I think there's a lot of disappointment following President Obama's election. I think the relationship, the fact that George Zimmerman happened to be acquitted of the murder of a Black child during the Obama years, which themselves announced a false post-racialism, right? I think that helped to fuel a certain degree of discontent. There's another piece to the story that's also worth playing out, because while those protests of the last several years are part of the story, I think the campus protests aren't just informed by that. I think many of them are modeled, or at least take their cues, from the anti-apartheid campaigns on college campuses in the mid to late 80s when I was in high school, and maybe the start of college, which called on universities to divest in investments, of course, that were related to South Africa, sort of divest in South Africa. What I like about these protests is the educational component to it. In some instances, I'm not sure how much effect they'll have on the college campuses themselves, but the fact that the protests are pushing us Americans broadly to interrogate our foreign policy, I think that's an important thing. And so I have some optimism about where this will go in the grand scheme of things, but some concern as well about what the implications are for the upcoming election.
Since you went there and you teased me with it, I got to follow up. So let's just keep going, Touré Reed. Talk to me then about what you think the implications are for the upcoming election.
Well, I wonder, and you probably have better insights on this than I, because I will confess I'm in grading season, so I've been sort of single-mindedly focused on grading.
Yeah.
But I wonder if some of the pushback that we're getting from Democrats is concern that Biden has a number of foreign policy problems that could result in either depressed Democratic turnout or protest votes. And I would submit, given for those interested in supporting Palestinians, I would submit a Trump re-election would be that much more disastrous than a Biden re-election, given some of the things that people like Jared Kushner have said, let's say, about Gaza.
Yeah.
So I am concerned about what the implications of the war in Ukraine in particular. That's been a concern for me for 2 years. But now, since October, what the implications will be come Election Day for Gaza.
I take your point that you've been grading. It's that time of the year, right? As we all know, USC canceled its main commencement ceremony. Columbia this week canceled its main commencement ceremony. So it's that time of the year, and these protests are wreaking havoc in a lot of ways. And so Professor Reed, like most professors right now, are grading, and I certainly get the pressure that puts on one. So you haven't had a chance to follow this stuff as closely as I have, but here's something that we learned literally just in the last 24 hours. I do want to get your take on, connected to the conversation we're having now, about the implications on the election. We learned yesterday, in the last 24 hours, that the U.S., at Biden's direction, President Biden's direction, paused an Israel arms shipment over this Rafah assault and the fears they had about it. So Antony Blinken, our Secretary of State, has been pushing, as you well know, as we all know, for a ceasefire. We had a false start on a ceasefire earlier this week. But again, we learned in the last 24 hours that at one point last week, our government paused an arms shipment to Israel because they were concerned about Israel going into Rafah. They were concerned about the humanitarian crisis. And when I read this, I was a bit shocked. I mean, Joe Biden has been moving in the way he's been moving. When I saw this story that they quietly paused an arms shipment last week, I'm of dual minds on this. I'm thinking through it myself. But now that I've shared it with you, what are your initial thoughts, even as I'm still noodling it?
Yeah, well, Joe Biden has a Muslim/Arab problem in Michigan.
Yes, he does.
And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's the trick bag that he's in, obviously. And it makes sense given the importance of Michigan to his path forward. That he might do something out of character. And that is a move that feels very much out of character for either a Democratic or Republican president.
Yeah. The nation of Israel, the nation state of Israel, Bibi Netanyahu's government has downplayed this and said that we work on our issues with our ally, the U.S., behind closed doors. We're not going to debate this publicly. But the word is that they were not happy about this arms shipment being paused last week over fears about the humanitarian crisis that was going to escalate when they went into Rafah. Now they are in Rafah. And so I don't know what this story says about the future of arms shipments to Israel from our government, but at least we know now that one shipment was stopped last week. The stopping, the halting, or to be more exact, the pausing of one shipment to Rafah, I don't think changes the minds of voters in Michigan because you stopped one shipment. And again, I have no way of knowing at this moment whether this policy is going to continue or whether it was, in fact, just that one moment in time. But the president, as Touré Reed said a moment ago, has a Muslim-Arab problem in Michigan, a swing state. He only won Michigan 4 years ago by 3 percentage points. He's in Wisconsin today, even as we speak right now. I believe he's in Wisconsin, another swing state. And so the president understands what he's up against, and maybe this pause last week was part of their narrative, and then the story gets out over the last 24 hours. We'll see what happens in the coming days, but it was just a fascinating thing for me that story came to light in the last 24 hours. That said, Professor Reed, the other point you made I want to get to right quick before we move forward was your critique of how disciplined, in air quotes, how disciplined the civil rights movement was as compared to these protests. You made this indispensable link between the Black Lives Matter protest. There's an indispensable link even, I think, to the civil rights protest because, again, we taught the nation how to protest. But for those who would push back and say that's the problem with these protests, they're not nonviolent, they're not disciplined like those Negroes were back in the 60s, and that's why we have an issue with it. You'd say what to that?
Well, from afar, I've been pretty impressed by the discipline. So I wasn't suggesting for a moment that these specific protests are completely undisciplined. I do think, though, there's a broad generational failure, and this would apply to Gen Xers, millennials, Gen Zs, to appreciate the fact that the civil rights movement was not spontaneous. The civil rights movement was, of course, choreographed, that a lot of training went into this, and, of course, the demands were tailored in accordance with the politics of the day, right? Mm-hmm. And I think too often what happens is in our popular imagination about what the civil rights movement was, that the protests themselves were both the means and the end. And I think these campus protests, from what I've seen so far, they're always, as you said, knuckleheads. They're always people who step out of line. Mm-hmm. But from what I've seen, just even thinking about my own college campus, they are well choreographed so far, anyway. And I do think that, though, in keeping with your point, there is a long-standing tradition of dismissing the righteousness or the rightness of the cause by way of tropes such as outside agitators, mm-hmm. and the like, and we've seen that in this case.
Yep. And finally here, and when we come forward, we'll get a chance to talk about your other work. I'm fascinated by your current monograph project called Menace to Equality, how the entertainment industry sold Reaganism to African Americans, and a couple of films out late that we can interrogate. So a lot more to talk about when we come forward, but in the 60 seconds I have left here, do you think that there are any legs to the strategy that these protesters are employing around the issue of divestment? I love your example of South Africa, a perfect example. But they're pressing their campuses, and a number of them, I'm thinking of Brown and a couple other schools who agreed that they would consider divestment policies regarding whatever they're doing with the nation state of Israel. So do you think there are any legs to that this divestment strategy connected to these protests?
I think maybe the focus is better directed toward the Biden administration itself. Right. That's not to let the colleges off the hook. Of course, the colleges, just as in the case of South Africa, the colleges would be complicit in a regime, in the case of South Africa, unambiguously, of racial domination, right? Yeah. But the real source of power is the state, Biden, right, the United States. Yeah. Yeah. So
focus on Biden. I hear your point. Our guest is noted history professor Touré Reed. It just happens to be the son of the great Adolph Reed. Success and brilliance runs in this family. More with Touré Reed when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
For all the freedom-loving folk, this is Tavis Smiley.
I feel like freedom.
Paid for by government.com. Did you know the United States Mint has issued a new Morgan silver dollar coin in proof condition for the first time? Not only that, they are also minted in 99.9% pure silver for the first time ever in history. Coin experts are calling this an amazing opportunity for anyone that knows the enduring popularity of Morgans. But you must hurry. Only 400,000 of these legal tender silver dollars were issued. These first ever Morgan silver dollars are brand new with stunning mirror-like finish, minted by the iconic San Francisco Mint. Call now and you're guaranteed a new first ever 99.9% pure silver proof Morgan dollar. To learn more, call 1-800-973-9717. If you order now, you will receive a free coin collector bonus pack, a $25 value, free with every order. Call 1-800-973-9717 now to secure your new Morgan silver dollars before they are gone. 17.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. The state of Washington could see its first ever black governor. Alona Kearney is the only female candidate in the race to become the next governor. She is running against Attorney General Bob Ferguson and State Senator Mark Mullet for the Democratic nomination. If elected, the Army veteran would be the state's third female governor. When it comes to the economy, Americans don't have much confidence in anybody, President Biden in particular. A Gallup poll shows that only 38% of U.S. adults have a great deal or a fair amount of confidence in Biden to make the right decisions about the economy. Biden's ratings on the economy is the lowest since the final year of George W. Bush's second term, when only 34% had confidence in his handling of the economy. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Every day, a child in poverty waits for a sponsor is another day of hopelessness. There are thousands of kids who've been waiting over a year, and they're waiting. Sponsor a child with compassion today. Just text the word radio to 83393.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
A monumental development for the WNBA. For the first time in the league's 27-year history, every team will have charter flights for all road games this season. In the previous 26 years, all teams were forced to travel on commercial flights. WNBA Commissioner Kathy Engelbert said the use of private jets will help address concerns of travel fatigue for players and safety concerns when players had to walk through airports. The WNBA's 12 teams will play 40 regular season games, 20 on the road. The NBA will announce its Most Valuable Player Award today. The winner will be revealed on TNT's Inside the NBA pregame show. The three finalists are Luka Doncic of Dallas, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander of Oklahoma City, and Denver center Nikola Jokic. Clippers guard Russell Westbrook is a finalist for the NBA's Social Justice Champion Award. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio that's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
For victims of drunk and drug driving, our grief is unique. But you are not alone. You always have a place at MAD. Call our 24-hour victim helpline at 877-MAD-HELP or visit mad.org.
Sometimes I struggle to get to sleep. My body stopped for the day, but my mind is still running. So I take ZQuil.
ZQuil, the world's #1 sleep aid brand, has a range of non-habit-forming products to fit you and your family's needs. Invest in a great night's sleep for the best you tomorrow.
I'm awake and ready to take on anything.
Better days start with ZQuil nights. Explore our products at ZQuil.com.
Use as directed. Keep out of reach of children.
Without the ones like you, who work tirelessly to keep things running, everything would suddenly stop. Hospitals, factories, schools, and power plants, they all depend on you. No matter the weather, emergency, or time of day, you're the ones who get it done. At Grainger, we're here for you with professional-grade industrial supplies. Count on real-time product availability and fast delivery. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Eggs are a staple in our diet, and there's only one egg with more delicious farm-fresh taste plus superior nutrition. Eggland's Best. With more vitamins, including 6 times more vitamin D and 10 times more vitamin E, plus 25% less saturated fat than ordinary eggs. Available in so many delicious varieties. Classic, cage-free, and organic. Eggland's Best. Better taste, better nutrition, better eggs.
Sometimes we lose, sometimes we win. Sometimes we try to fit it all in. Sometimes we don't know what's in store. Sometimes we find what we're looking for. Sometimes we're rolling easy and free. Sometimes 1 and 1 makes 3. So much to love along this ride. That's why Nationwide is on your side.
Nationwide Mutual Insurance Company and affiliates, Columbus,
The
Ohio.
thing no one tells you about periods is that your flow changes every day, and so should your tampon size. Tampax has 5 absorbencies to match your changing flow. If it hurts to remove, go down a size. If it leaks, go up a size. Only Tampax has a leak guard braid to help give you up to 100% leak and odor-free protection. All-day comfort and protection for under $5 a month. Based on average U.S. consumer usage at manufacturer's suggested price. However, pricing is at the sole discretion of the retailer. Excludes 8-count packs.
The possibility of lung cancer can be pretty scary, especially if you're one of approximately 8 million current or former smokers at high risk. That's why SavedByTheScan.org wants you to know that now there's a breakthrough low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early, and it only takes 60 seconds. You stop smoking. Now start screening. For an easy quiz to see if you're eligible, visit SavedByTheScan.org. It could save your life. SavedByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
Helping to make you the most knowledgeable person in your circle of friends. This is Tavis Smiley.
This is Tavis Smiley in conversation with Illinois State University history professor Touré Reed about a number of things. We spent a good part of this conversation thus far talking about these campus protests, specifically, though, through the lens of the black protest tradition, and that's a conversation that most people are not having when they talk about these campus protests. One final thing on that, Professor Reed, then we'll pivot to some of your other work. I want to read this from one of our listeners. I found it interesting and just want to get your comment on it, and we'll push ahead. The writer of this piece titles it Protest Amnesia, and kind of just posted it. I'm just getting a chance to read it. It's called Protest Amnesia. After seeing and hearing the protest chants of college students around the country, particularly the strident calls for divestment, something dawned on me, Tavis. There has been a distinct lack of specificity in regard to what businesses, stocks, and commodities these protest groups are demanding that universities divest themselves of. This information is available, perhaps or perhaps not readily available, but the information of what exactly the schools are invested in is out there. Economists and business professors at these schools could help steward these groups' understanding about how to target their demands more strategically. But moreover, a monumental lesson from the black protest movement can be gleaned from how black activists successfully leverage the boycott or the potential of a boycott of consumer goods like Coca-Cola, beer, and fast food in advance of the Super Bowl when the state of Arizona refused to sign the bill establishing the King holiday. If student groups around the country pivoted toward a threat of mass boycotts against American corporations and consumer goods, CEOs would be effectively pressuring the U.S. and Israeli governments to capitulate to their demands. It should, at the very least, be a central component of the student group's tactical approach. Your thoughts, Professor Reed?
Well, a boycott can be a useful tool, but I guess the reason that I tilt toward focusing more on politics in a direct way maybe is twofold. One, I'm not comfortable relying on the conscience of corporations to do what's right by people. And two, I think if you consider that the right to protest is not bestowed to us from on high, unfortunately, that there are limitations, there are limits, legal limits to the right to protest, and oftentimes it's unfortunate there are legal limits to the right to protest. One could imagine those boycotts being interpreted as anti-Semitic in this particular context. And of course, there's already legislation afoot that some have argued conflate critiques of Israel with anti-Semitism, right? And so I think, where's that legislation coming from? It's coming from, obviously, by definition, the political sphere. It makes a lot more sense to me in principle to focus the efforts on political mobilization, and I mean direct political mobilization, even as I appreciate the value of the boycott, and certainly the boycott paid dividends to the civil rights movement.
Yep. One final thing here on this, given what you just said now, and you used the phrase anti-Semitism. And I was in a conversation with somebody the other day about the fact that at Columbia and maybe a couple other places, they are literally, I mean this is real talk. They are literally looking at certain phrases that they believe are anti-Semitic. And one of those phrases is by any means necessary. how you take, speaking of, again, the civil rights era, how do you take a statement from Malcolm X, by any means necessary, and then define that as anti-Semitic? I do not know, but hold your horses. Story out now. I'm looking at it right now. Faraji, my producer, just handed it to me. Facebook's oversight board is now considering if, quote, from the river to the sea, close quote, is hate speech. So you're looking at Malcolm X's line, by any means necessary, being regarded by some as anti-Semitic. And now Facebook's oversight board is going to consider if the phrase from the river to the sea is hate speech. So it turns out, Professor Reed, this isn't just a conversation here about how we're pushing back on protest writ large.
Right.
Now we're in a conversation about language. I yield to the gentleman from Illinois State University.
Well, I mean, I'm almost speechless, unfortunately, but I can very much appreciate how one could reimagine Malcolm X's by any means necessary as anti-Semitic. I would not be one who would imagine it this way, but the obvious path forward for those disposed to do so would be the contention that he was anti-Semitic owed to his affiliation with the Nation of Islam. And again, that's not my argument, but I would bet cash money that would be somebody's argument.
Yeah. It's going to be fascinating in the coming days to see what Facebook does regarding that particular phrase, and you can best believe that if they make a move to ban that phrase, we're going to be in a whole nother conversation. Again, not just about protests in this country, but even about language now in this country. That's these are some bizarre times. I digress on that for now. Let me pivot a complete pivot. Not even a pivot. I'm doing a complete turn to some other stuff that I wanted to talk to you about in this hour. In the 2 or 3 minutes I have right now, we'll continue, of course, when we come forward. But just set the frame for me, if you will, about some of your current work. I'm specifically interested in this monograph project you're working on called Menace to Equality, how the entertainment industry sold Reaganism to African Americans. We mentioned Reagan earlier in this conversation as the guy, interesting and ironically, who signed the King Bill into law. He did that speaking of protest, he did that over protestation, didn't really want to do it, finally got forced to do it, and did so. But this notion of the entertainment industry, Hollywood, selling Reaganism to African Americans, and you call it Menace to Equality. Talk to me about that.
So what I'm getting at is that public policy in the United States as it pertains to racial inequality since the 60s has oscillated between one of two frames. So it's a race binary, what I call race or racism. And so we've tended to attribute lingering racial disparities to either blacks' cultural deficiencies, alleged cultural deficiencies, race, in the form of underclass ideology, or whites' cultural deficiencies, racism. And we've been in this race-racism binary for a very long time that displaces economic inequality from the mix, right? What's happening in capitalism. The race account, again, is dominated, and I should be clear, the race account, which is the more conservative one, underclass ideology, dominated discourse on inequality from the 80s through the Obama presidency. You only have to think about the role of super predators trope in First Lady Hillary Clinton's and Senator Joe Biden's stump speeches for the Omnibus Crime Act to appreciate that, both of whom insisted that the context that created these empathy and conscience-free super predators didn't matter. The urgency of now necessitated that we build more prisons, establish mandatory minimums, and broaden the scope of capital punishment. And, who cares about the context, right? That creates crime. Well, thanks in no small part to the protests that took off, again, in the BLM era, we know this collectively about, Senator Joe Biden and First Lady Hillary Clinton. Of course, what we don't tend to acknowledge is that black Americans coalesced around those very same tropes in the 80s and 90s. And you can see that clearly in the public remarks of figures in pop culture. And I'll pause there because I think you've got a break.
Yeah, it's a perfect pause. I hear your critique of both Biden and Clinton, but then he turns the corner, Professor Reed does, and says, but we bought into that as well. And so you understand why his monograph project is called Menace to Equality, how the entertainment industry sold Reaganism to African Americans. We'll continue unpacking that when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
From the Merc Heart with love, this is Tavis Smiley.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont, a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
Hi, it's Tavis, Smiley. First, thank you for your support of KBLA Talk 1580. We deeply appreciate you. So, I get asked all the time, Tavis, when are you going to bring back that State of the Black Union symposium you used to do? You know the one where you had all those black intellectuals on stage every year and everybody watched all day live on C-SPAN? Yeah, I know the one. Let's bring them back. Well, I am pleased to tell you that if you go to KBLA1580.com right now, you can sign up to be in the audience here in Los Angeles when we go back live on C-SPAN with a stage full of black thinkers and influencers for a historic conversation. America has never seen a stage full of black folk talking about the urgency of now. Climate justice, climate equity, climate resilience. It's going down Tuesday, June 18th, 4 to 7 p.m. at the California Science Center in Exposition Park. Admission is free, but you must register at KBLA1580.com. Once we reach capacity, but if you want to be in the room when we go live from Los Angeles, Tuesday, June 18th, head to KBLA1580.com right now to reserve your seat. Caring about the climate, caring about the community. With KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your blast.
Have a deep update.
Did you know that feeling sluggish or weighed down could be a sign that your digestive system isn't working at its best? Taking Metamucil every day can help. Metamucil fiber powders help promote your daily digestive health using a plant-based fiber called psyllium. The gelling action of this special fiber traps and removes waste, so you can feel lighter and more energetic. Metamucil, promoting digestive health for a better you. Learn more at Metamucil.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Made fresh daily in the Mert Park, Los Angeles, California. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
Tavis Smiley, Professor Touré Reed, brilliant historian. So you shared the critique. I heard it loud and clear of both Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton, but I heard you making a turn toward black folk. Take it away.
Yeah, we embrace the same stuff. I mean, and if you're alive and cognizant during the Obama years, you saw it. I went to a number of MLK dinners and book talks and the like that followed a formula. And the formula, and this would be around 2008, 2009, the formula followed the Obama playbook to a degree, that the presenters would establish a fact or announce a fact that established their expertise in black Americans. They then announced they sure love some President Obama or candidate Obama, and we had to support him as a victory for black people everywhere. And then that was a necessary piece, that middle piece, because the rest of the spiel was on how poor black Americans sucked. Basically, right? The cultural deficiencies, the underclass tropes, the alleged cultural deficiencies that hobbled black Americans broadly and ensured lingering disparities. And so much of that discourse, just like Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden way back in the 90s, insisted that we couldn't talk about or shouldn't talk about what I might see as the structural sources of inequality, such as the developments that have taken place in late capitalism that put blacks at a disproportionate disadvantage for advancing. But instead, we need to focus on what we could do to uplift ourselves. And what that invariably centered on was acknowledging the deficiencies of some of us. It always meant poor black Americans. Very few people were so explicit about that. And role modeling, right? So self-help. And it was an anachronistic, I should say an atavistic throwback to Bookerite pre-civil rights, pre-New Deal black politics, right? And you could see this in pop culture. You could see this in all those hood films. Anything by John Singleton would do it. Just think about Boys in the Hood, right? I think the most telling line in Boys in the Hood is the one that everybody knows. It's Ice Cube's final line before his character's murdered, and he says something like, either they don't know, they don't want to know, or they don't care what's going on in the hood. Well, that comes at the end of the film. If you go back and reflect on what preceded the film, all you get is a narrative of black dysfunction, right? Poor blacks, cultural dysfunction, babies having babies, female-headed households in which the women, the mothers, who were too young to know how to be an effective parent and love their boys in the wrong way, but failed to teach their boys how to be men. And as a result, that set the stage for the proliferation of out-of-wedlock pregnancies and murders of young men who didn't know themselves within the narrative and had no sense of community and collective uplift. And, of course, what's lost from those films, which appear to be sympathetic, and there are characters within the film that the filmmakers are sympathetic toward, but what gets lost is the context, right? Why are these communities this way? And the closest that you get is a failure for us to pool our resources. Well, truthfully, as Bayard Rustin pointed out in his critiques of Daniel Patrick Moynihan and other liberals of that era, left critique of them, the Irish Americans, Italian Americans, Jews did not uplift themselves collectively like that. They benefited from labor unions and had good municipal jobs.
It's a fascinating monograph project. It's called Menace to Equality: How the Entertainment Industry Sold Reaganism to African Americans. A bit more on that in our remaining moments with Touré Reed when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
Unapologetically progressive, unapologetically black. You're tapped into Tavis Smiley.
If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found BenefitsCheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. BenefitsCheckup.org.
My daughter was diagnosed with a rare malignant rhabdoid tumor on the spine. They sent her straight to St. Jude. My hope was gone. But when you get there, everyone's like, hey, we're not going to give up. And when you see other people not giving up on your child, that makes all the difference in the world. When I found out I was just grateful they saved my baby's life.
Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. Stay Housed LA has the resources you need to know your rights and the legal support to back them up. The COVID-19 pandemic has cost people their jobs and livelihoods. This has left an estimated 1/3 of households not being able to make rent and facing losing their homes. This is a fear no one in our community should have to face. You have rights, though, and Stay Housed LA is here to help. Stay Housed LA is a partnership between the County of Los Angeles, the City of Los Angeles, and local community and legal service providers. Together, they provide tenants with the information and support needed to exercise their rights so they can remain safely in their homes. Find out more about your rights by shop. Get the legal assistance you need. Find additional resources in Los Angeles County and the City of Los Angeles. Stay connected to Stay Housed LA County for updates. This and more at stayhousedla.org. Stay connected to Stay Housed LA for updates. This and more at stayhousedla.org. That's stayhousedla.org. Or call their hotline at 213-694-0040. We've got your black with a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
If you love to travel, Capital One has a rewards credit card that's perfect for you. With Venture X, earn unlimited double miles on everything you buy and turn everyday purchases into extraordinary trips. Plus, receive premium travel benefits like access to over 1,300 airport lounges where you just check in and chill out. Open up a world of possibilities with Capital One. What's in your wallet?
Terms apply. Lounge access is subject to change. See CapitalOne.com for details.
Let's get back to more of this rich dialogue with Tavis Smiley.
Rich dialogue with not Tavis Smiley, but Touré Reed, history professor at Illinois State University. Got about 3 minutes left here. I want to close, I think, on this note, given that you walked me up to the line now so I can ask this, and you referenced it earlier anyway. To those, let me preface this by saying that never mind all the hell that I caught for trying to hold Barack Obama accountable as president. I voted for Barack Obama twice. I tell folk, if you think because of my critique that I wasn't an Obama supporter, then put down the crack pipe. If you think I chose John McCain and Sarah Palin over Barack and Biden, then you're crazy. If you think I chose Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan over Barack and Joe Biden, Barack Obama and Joe Biden, you're crazy. So I can support you, I can vote for you, and still hold you accountable. That's what I was attempting to do. The pushback notwithstanding, how do you respond to those who thought that his election was going to usher us into some post-racial era?
Well, look, I mean, you and I had the same take on President Obama, down to having voted for him twice while critiquing him. And I think most of those people who had embraced Obama as ushering in a post-racial era were coming at that, on some level, disingenuously, but with his help. He wasn't post-racial. He was post-racism. Mm-hmm. He traded in racist underclass tropes in much the same way that Bill Clinton did, but crucially Ronald Reagan. Bill Clinton came with the right wing of the Democratic Party that insisted that to win the Democrats, they needed to be more like the Republicans on key issues, race among them, right? So President Obama was his so-called post-racial framing, really, again, because it embraced racist underclass tropes just like his Democratic predecessor and, crucially, the conservatives before him. What he really was doing is selling a narrative of post-racism where he was encouraging black Americans to stop complaining about racism. Rhetorically, right? That's his rhetorical stance. Mm-hmm. And to, once again, focus on what they can do for themselves. And that's baked into all of his so-called major race speeches. They were major race speeches, but they were race speeches that could have been delivered by Booker T. Washington.
Yeah. I voted for Obama not once but twice because I hoped, certainly the first time, by the second time I knew a little better, but I voted for him anyway. He was the better choice, no question about it, hands down. But I voted for him initially, Touré Reed, because I thought and hoped, believed, was praying that his election would open up progressive possibilities. I knew who he was, but I hoped it would open up the door to progressive possibilities. Didn't quite work out that way, but I digress. I still don't regret my vote, given the options at that moment. Right. But I appreciate your reflections on that notion of a post-racial America that we're still waiting on. I digress. Touré Reed is a history professor at Illinois State University. As I mentioned earlier, only because I respect him so much, the son of the great Adolph Reed. His new monograph project is called Ministry Equality: How the Entertainment Industry Sold Reaganism to African Americans. I am delighted, Professor Reed, in this conversation. I now allow you to return to grading those papers, and I thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you so much, brother. I appreciate it.
More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. The state of Washington could see its first ever black governor.